All right, Jimmy, are we good to go?
Yes.
Okay. I'd like to welcome everyone to this CANTO Conversations. My name is Scott Argue. I'm Executive Vice President for SaskTel International. I've got about 30 plus, I'm getting old, 30 plus years of experience in ICT, 20 plus years in the telecom industry, and a long history in the Caribbean region. I've been working on projects in the Caribbean since about 2010. I'm joined today by my colleague and good friend, Mr. Peter Dang. Peter's Manager of Strategic Planning at SaskTel. Peter's got 20 plus years in telecom as well, mostly in wireless, dating back to sort of 2G and spanning sort of plan, design, build, operate, optimize. And Peter is heavily involved in SaskTel's 5G rollout that's happening right now, and I'm going to speak to that here today. But he also is very focused on broadband strategy across all technologies for SaskTel, so we can answer a broad variety of questions if required and desired. We're going to walk through a presentation here today. Should take us about 45 minutes is my estimation. We will have time at the end for questions. There's already been a few questions submitted in advance, but if you have questions, if you could submit them in the chat. What we'll do is try to curate those questions and get to as many as we possibly can at the end of the session. And those that we can't get to, we'll certainly capture and then ensure that we can get responses back out to people after the fact. So that's the intent of today's session. I'm just going to give myself a second to share the screen here, and then we'll start walking through our presentation. There. Hopefully that works for everybody.
Yep, we can see it, Scott.
Okay, perfect. So we're going to tag team a little bit, just a couple of slides that I'll speak to, and then the rest Peter will speak to. So just a little bit of background on SaskTel and SaskTel International. So SaskTel is an operating telecom in Canada in the province of Saskatchewan. It's a company that's been around for 115 plus years. It's owned by the provincial government here in Saskatchewan, and they operate essentially every line of business that a telco can have, including voice, mobile, broadband of all types, data center services, ICT services, home security, monitoring, home automation, and probably a few I'm missing. It's about a $1.3 billion revenue company. There's about 3,300 employees in the company. And it's the sole owner of SaskTel International, which is the company that I work for. SaskTel International, a little bit younger, we're about a 40-year-old company. We were established really to help design, build, and operate networks around the world. Back in the late 70s and early 80s, SaskTel built the biggest fiber optic network in the world here in Saskatchewan, and they took the expertise of building out those technologies on the road to help design and build networks around the world. One of our very first projects 40-ish years ago was actually in Trinidad, so we've got a very long history in the Caribbean region. And we also have a secondary line of business, which is we have a suite of software that is an OSS that inventories telecom networks and automates the provisioning of services across those networks. And the tagline we like to use is built for telcos by a telco. We're very embedded inside of SaskTel, and all the products and services that we market are really used inside of our parent company as well. Again, from a SaskTel International perspective, we're close to 40 years now. We've done over 100 projects around the world in 40 countries, over 6 continents. From a wireless perspective, and this is based on our parent company SaskTel's experience, our wireless history dates back into the 80s through basically every generation of technology, so 1G through to 5G. We've had experiences in when cellular was voice only, all the way through to now. I think people have their phones and don't actually use them for phone calls anymore. It's all data services, and so we've sort of had the experience of building through all those generations of technology. We're now very deep into a 5G program, and that's the portion that Peter's going to speak here to today. I'm going to hand it over here at this point for Peter, but I'll jump into a few spots to join as well. But Peter, do you want to take it away at this point?
Yeah, thanks, Scott. Hope everybody can hear me okay. So yeah, as far as 5G, how do we get here? What pushed us this direction? So certainly, when we look at customer industry in the future, customers at the center of everything we do, and the demand from the customer, both from more data and more speed, continues to grow at rapid pace. So for me, looking at planning the network, that's probably the biggest reason why we went this route and why most operators went this route. Simply, we needed a way to deliver more speed, more data, more performance, more reliability, more security. And as COVID showed us, if we didn't already realize it before, COVID certainly showed us that connectivity is critical to everybody's day-to-day lives, allowing folks to thrive and participate in the digital economy that we have today. On the industry side, whether you're a telco or a cable co, we are in an industry of evolution and innovation. Technology companies, that is the expectation of us to continue to move forward with the latest and greatest tech. Coupled that with various regulatory pressures as telcos and cable cos, internet service providers, we're always looking for more spectrum from the regulator. So with that comes certainly strings attached of deploying new technology to help to serve the people that are using it. Coupled with that, all of the various geopolitics around the world. Certainly on this side of the world, we are quite heavily influenced by the challenges that USA and China seem to be facing with one another. And then last but not least, brand value and competition. As I said before, we're all technology companies, or trying to be the best technology company in our markets. Being quick to market with the latest technology, ideally beating the competition there, seems to be of great value to our customer and how they make their decision on who serves them. On the future side, I think this is where a lot of the excitement and hype of 5G came from, is about building for the future. So just as in our day-to-day lives, everybody's adopted smartphones and use of the internet and data. We're seeing the same thing, obviously, on the business side, with enterprises and large businesses trying to find eke out more efficiency, save money, produce more, and do all that via data-driven insights and automation, and eventually or inevitably AI. Another thing that seems to be somewhat inevitable is this digital future where everything is connected, whether it be network of sensors or private enterprise networks, mission critical connectivity. All of these things, the industry continues to point at those as things that will come, that will leverage 5G. And for us, our operators, if we can position ourselves well early enough, we can find some monetization with those use cases. Next slide, Scott. So when it comes to a business case, the 5G business case, this is a question I get a lot from the various operators that we talk to. It's various reasons why we should build 5G. The one that most people are looking for, that monetization piece, seems to be still somewhat in the future as opposed to the present today. So for us at SaskTel, when we looked at the 5G business case, certainly at the time there was a pending ban of our current network vendor. That has since come to fruition in the ban, but we did make this decision prior to that ban. On top of that, quite a bit of competitive activity in the Canadian market. So for us, making sure that we didn't churn our customers to competitors that had 5G, that was a big piece of the puzzle. The next two bullets here, network refresh, end of support, end of life, as well as network capacity. These were very common drivers for us when we went from 1G to 2G and 2G to 3G, 3G to 4G, was if we were going to spend money on our network, whether to refresh it, to replace end-of-life products, or simply to add capacity to serve our customers, we want to spend that money with the newest technology where it has a longer runway, a longer life cycle into the future. And as I said before, enabling the connected world of the future. For us here in Saskatchewan, we are looked at as the leader in this province, and there's somewhat of an expectation of us to provide all of the connectivity in this region to allow people to connect to anything they need to connect to. So these various bullets really is what we use as a launch pad to build 5G across our province. Next slide, Scott. So as far as what we built, how we did it, so across the province of Saskatchewan, we have about 1,000 cell sites. We're about halfway done with 450 sites complete. As far as how long that took, we're in our third year of the program, with that first year being very much bring in the vendor, learn their product, understand how it works, make sure it works equal to or better than our current vendor. Really, pay particular attention to that piece before we start building it across the province. So as you can expect, we built from the largest centers to the smallest centers. But that being said, we do have quite a few of our remaining towers are in very small, remote, rural places, villages and towns of 50, 60 homes. We do have infrastructure and coverage to pretty much everywhere in our province. And really the aim for that was, working towards closing the digital divide, making sure everybody has connectivity across our region. So as I said, halfway done. What's left, mostly rural, serving resort communities. Those would be like lakes and national parks, that sort of, or, provincial parks, that sort of thing. First Nations communities, which are quite rural as well, and all the highways in between. Current pace, about a couple hundred towers a year. We plan on continuing that pace until the end of the program. It's also worth noting that when we talk about these 1,000 cell sites, because we've been doing this since the 1G days, we have a variety of towers, various vintages, different sizes and shapes, different shelters, all of which all have their own unique design, unique considerations when it came to taking stuff down and putting new vendor stuff up to make this all work.
Yeah, and I'll maybe just add before we go to the next slide, we purposely went to the urban areas to try and get the maximum population coverage. So although we're only about half done in terms of cell sites being converted to 5G, we're about 80% done in terms of population coverage, which is a key driver for us.
So I alluded to this in the last slide. These are generally speaking the steps we took from start to finish. Assembled quite a large cross-functional team of subject matter experts across SaskTel to make this happen. And certainly, kudos to all the folks at SaskTel that were participated in this exercise. Really, what we really wanted to do was we wanted to make sure if we were going to effectively take down a whole entire network and build a brand new one, that we had all our bases covered, that we didn't have blind spots, that things that, everything that should be considered in the planning and design phase is captured and dealt with early on. Helps with reducing the rework, helps with going back and spending money, unnecessarily spending additional money to fix things, as well as it helps, to reduce the impact to the customer. As you can understand, the current 3G, 4G network was live and in production. So anytime you're taking a site down to swap it, the customers in that area are affected both in coverage and capacity. So being able to do that quickly and efficiently, reducing the downtime was really important to us. So as far as the steps go, a quick overview. Vendor selection, first and foremost, that took a lot of time, and I'll walk us through a little bit of how we did that. Then came the working with the vendor as well as our own internal engineering folks, nailing down which type of 5G architecture and design we wanted to build. Various flavors there that I'll get into as well. With the architecture and high level design nailed down, then came the deployment strategy, where to build first, where to build last, both in trying to cover as many people as we can as quickly as possible, but also making sure that we're good at swapping these sites by the time we get to our key market areas in the cities. Some work behind the scenes that was quite important. We built a lab cluster. So here at SaskTel, we have a lab that is a full duplicate of our production network. It allows us to test any new products coming into our network, make sure they work as advertised, make sure our teams understand how to use them, how to configure them, so that when we do take it to production, we don't end up in a scenario where we're panicking with the vendor to try to fix something. Once products make their way through our lab cluster where we do our quality assurance, then we brought the products into what we call a golden cluster. I think this is fairly common across most regions, where the vendor would build a small cluster in collaboration with the operator to prove that their equipment actually works, that their equipment can integrate to the other vendor with various KPIs and drive testing and field testing that happens. Once golden cluster has been signed off, then comes mass deployment, to which, as I stated earlier, this is where you have multiple crews and multiple project teams trying to swap towers as fast as we can to limit downtime, and also to try to hit that 200 site a year mark that I had talked about prior. So as you can see, when you kind of look at this list, it's very much a crawl, walk, run approach here at SaskTel. We really want to, we want to make sure we understand everything, how it works, how it functions, how to configure it before we get out there and really start running with it. And I think this is an important thing. Certainly something we focus on a lot at SaskTel, the idea of being a sustainable operator, making sure that everybody across our teams, whether they're design guys or support guys or operation guys, that everybody understands how it works, that we have the documentation, that we can fix things when they break, and try to limit the amount of times we have to pick up the phone and call our vendor for support. So with regards to vendor selection, I think the obvious one is, anytime you're choosing a vendor, CapEx and OpEx, how much does it cost today? How much is it going to cost you, months from now, years from now? So when we did our vendor selection, we did bring in quite a number of vendors, received proposals from all of them, compared not only the cost of the hardware, but the software, the licensing and the support, the features, the cost of tools, how long the products run for, all of these sort of things to try to understand, when forming a new partnership, what is that, at best guess, what is that partnership going to cost us? Another key aspect is aligning with other ISPs. As a relatively small operator in Canada, it's important for us to take a look at what's everybody else using, both across Canada and the United States. Not that we want to copy the marks to their test, but certainly if you can align with a larger operator, then they drive the roadmaps for that region, and you get the benefits of that. So that certainly had a factor to play in how we made our decision, because your voice is a lot louder if your voice is also the voice of a large operator. And then, not to get too deep into these details, but technical specifications was a big one. This is where we had a lot of our engineering folks look at all of the radio specs, base station specs, power consumption, the size, the weight, because as you can imagine, all of these things, they'll have cross impacts to the amount of money you spend on your tower, on your power systems, what you're going to do on your transport, all of those things that I'll get into in the next few slides here. Next slide, Scott. So when it comes to network architecture for 5G, as I said before, various architectures to choose from. One of the neat things about the 5G standard is they did create all of these options. The flip side is it does make it a bit confusing. So without talking about every single one, I think the most common one in the market, and the one that we went with, is option 3 in the bottom left-hand side there. The reason why we did that is it allowed us to leverage our existing 4G core, and allows us to leverage our existing 4G LT spectrum capacity. So in that option 3 scenario, when you build 5G that way, the 5G radio network effectively connects to the 4G core and allows you to use 4G and 5G simultaneously via dual connectivity. This is important because when we launched 5G, the amount of 5G phones in the market was still relatively small, in that less than 50%. So we couldn't, when we were looking at building 5G, we didn't want to move people to a standalone 5G network that might be slower or have less spectrum than our 4G network, which has a lot of capacity and a lot of speed available to it today. So by going non-standalone option 3, it allowed us to make sure that customers that went to 5G could use all of the capacity of 4G plus bolt-on 5G spectrum and get an even better experience. It allowed us to make sure that for the regular customer out there in the field, when they run a speed test, they can see the difference and feel the difference. Now, I think this scenario changes. Keep in mind, this was back in 21, 22. So now that we're in 2024, certainly some different scenarios in the works now in the market with standalone option 2 becoming much more viable. So with some devices now supporting standalone via the option 2 architecture, it's certainly worth considering because although building a 5G core is no easy task, it does allow you to do some of the more advanced 5G things like network slicing, where you can dedicate slices of your network to customers and to services. So for us at SaskTel, we're, as I said, option 3 today, leveraging 4G. As more and more people use 5G, we will start to move more spectrum to 5G and move our way towards that eventual option 2 architecture where it's a 5G core and a 5G radio and the 4G goes away. So lots of pros and cons, not only in the devices and the spectrum and what type of core network you have, but also the life cycles and which vendors you have and what they can support today and into the future. Slide, Scott. So I mentioned before cross impacts. For myself, being a radio access network guy, this was near and dear to my heart. So when I talk about the size of the radios and the amount of power it uses, it has somewhat of a ripple effect across the rest of the cell site. So in this diagram, you can see spectrum in the middle. Spectrum being, I think that's the first big hurdle to get over is, well, what spectrum are you going to use? Are you going to get new spectrum from the regulator? Are you going to repurpose spectrum that you already have? In our case, we repurposed spectrum that was already available, which is band 66 or N66. So once you have the spectrum nailed down of what you're going to use, that determines your radios. When selecting radios, the size and the weight had a big factor, because if the radios are really big, now you have to look at reinforcing your antenna or reinforcing your tower. Sorry, if it uses a lot of power, you have to build up your power systems to support it. If you're putting up, depending on the number of radios you put up, determines how the sizing of your base station. Sizing of your base station impacts how much backhaul you need, whether it's 1 gig or 10 gig, whether it's fiber or microwave. So there's a lot of cross impacts here that I think for most operators span across a lot of different departments. I know at SaskTel, the folks handling towers, that's a different team than the radio folks, different team than the backhaul fiber folks, different team than the power folks. So having, pulling together that cross-functional team to understand all these impacts really early on in the planning phase, it paid huge dividends for us at SaskTel. By the time we got out to the market to build it, everybody knew what we were building, how we were going to build it. Sites that had power problems or tower problems were identified early on. It allowed us to pivot away from those sites, let those teams resolve deficiencies that they found. Meanwhile, that we had the network teams working on sites that could be swapped out. So it saved us a lot of chaos and confusion when it came to project implementation, because we already knew ahead of time where we could build fast and where we had to build a bit slower. And to be fair, lots more detail within this slide of all the cross impacts, what to do, what not to do, what to give up, and more than happy to go through that in deeper detail with folks that are interested. Feel free to reach out. Next slide, Scott. So I talked about this one earlier, deployment strategy. So once you have a vendor picked, then you have specifications. Once you have the specifications, you can now start to understand, how do I actually do this and how is it going to impact me? Once you understand how it impacts you, for us, we like to take all new products through this cycle, through lab cluster and a golden cluster prior to just going out there and building. And just, for the leadership team, for our shareholder, it makes it's a little bit easier to sleep at night when you know that these new products that have just showed up, that they work in the lab in an enclosed environment, that they've been in and baking for a little while and with no surprises, allows us to take that next step into that production golden cluster where we can get the vendor to prove to us that the products are well optimized and function well before we commit to the bigger deployment. Now, certainly, for some operators that are, that are perhaps smaller than SaskTel, this may be a challenge. I think a lot of operators don't have lab clusters, but certainly that golden cluster is a key piece to make sure that everything is working well and is understood by the teams before moving on to deployment. I've seen before where operators move rapidly into deployment and they're kind of tripping over their own feet as they're trying to learn it at the same time as build it. So as it's important to start the first two steps early on, get a good handle on what you have and how it works, so that when it comes to deployment, you can execute without any hesitation. Next slide, Scott. I'll pass back to you, Scott. You're on mute right now.
Thanks. Yeah, I'll take over for a couple slides. So one of the things we do from a SaskTel International perspective is we take the expertise of SaskTel and we provide it to our clients to help them design, build, and operate networks where they need some assistance. So what we like to say is we've got some brilliant minds in the organization, and you can harness those minds to help you move your organization forward. We get involved in all sorts of projects, from very big, where we're sort of providing a team to do a turnkey design, build, operate, transition model, down to just providing an expert to consult on an issue for a short period of time. And we're happy and excited to talk to people about those opportunities and where areas we might be able to help. Specific to this region, I want to talk a little bit about some work that we did between 2016 and 2019 in Bahamas with our friends at Cable Bahamas and Alive. So we had a team on site there for a little over 2 years to help with the design, build, and operation of the Alive network. The resources there were all sourced out of SaskTel. They had all been involved in SaskTel's 4G LTE deployment, and we're able to bring that expertise to this project and to the country. In fact, Peter was one of those resources who was in Bahamas for 2 years working on that project. We found now, since COVID, there's a little bit of a amenability to not necessarily have bums and seats and people on site continually, but we're still very open to providing resources to come on site to help with the design, build, and operation of these networks, be they wired or wireless. And we really try to approach it as a life cycle. And in this one, we were involved quite early before licensing and the project was officially kicked off, and ended right through to operations. Part of what our team's goal there was to transition knowledge to local resources for ongoing operation of the network. So from a SaskTel and SaskTel International perspective, we don't really want to come and embed with your company and be there forever. Well, we want to be there for a period of time to help empower a project, and then we want to bring our resources back and bring them back into our organization to sort of drive the next evolutions within our networks. That knowledge transfer model for Alive, I think if you meet up with any of the folks who work for Cable Bahamas or Alive and ask about that, I would think all of them will say it was quite successful. And we've got Peter and I were down for a visit not too long ago. We've got people who joined the company during that project that are still with the company, passionate about the business. And I think would all say they benefited greatly from the knowledge transfer that occurred during the life of that project. And so from a live perspective, they had some very tight timelines from the regulator that they had to meet. With our help, those timelines and goals were able to be achieved. And they're very self-sufficient now. So we still help out a little bit here and there when asked. But the Alive folks run that network fully. And I like to think, and I think if you ask them, we have a fair bit of DNA in that company that has sort of helped with the success that they have there. And again, this is a model that we have available. And if any of you on the call are interested or thinking about an evolution in your networks where you could use a little bit of help, whether it's a little bit of help with some a small bit of expertise, or a team to come and help you design, build, and operate a portion of your network, we would really like to talk to you. We're a little bit ahead of schedule. I think we're at 30 minutes. I said we might be about 45 minutes to get through the presentation, but I want to make a couple of offers before we get to Q&A. So one is, we are very committed to CANTO. We've been a longstanding member of CANTO, and we will be at Canto in Miami, both Peter and myself. And our intention is to have some time and a room there to go deeper into SaskTel's 5G journey and implementation. So in the slide deck today, Peter touched on some very high notes of sort of where we're at in the program. But the reality is, each of you are thinking about 5G in your networks. You're going to have some unique questions, some unique situations, and you'll be coming at it from a unique perspective. So, if there's interest, we will be at Canto and we will have a separate room to be able to go through some of those discussions, spend some time to figure out, what your path forward might look like. And, selfishly, if there's a way that we can help there. And it gives you really a chance to sort of get some firsthand knowledge from some folks who've been there. As Peter mentioned, we're pretty far down our 5G evolution. We're kind of into rinse and repeat mode now, where we're just following the deployment, and so we can bring a lot of those lessons learned that we've gained over the last couple of years and share them with you. And that's one of the things that I want to touch on from a SaskTel and SaskTel International perspective. SaskTel really only builds networks for itself in one province in Canada, and we don't go anywhere else unless we're building with partners to build these networks. So as a result, we're a real open book, and we quite often will host clients up here in Canada, in Regina, to meet with the folks within our parent company, SaskTel, and see firsthand, what they're doing with products, services, network evolutions. And that's an offer we'd make to all of you, is if there's something that you want to learn about how maybe SaskTel is running their business, how they're building their networks, how they're operating their networks, we're happy to host any of you up in Canada at any time, and we're an open book in that regard. And we also travel a fair bit throughout the Caribbean region based on the projects that we have going on, but also just in general. So, if you think there'd be value in us, coming to your home turf and visiting with you and seeing what you've got going on from a network perspective, we're happy to try and engage some of that travel as well. So, hopefully that you found that valuable in terms of a bit of background into SaskTel's 5G evolution, a little bit of background into SaskTel International and what we can do and how we can help. And now we would like to open up the chat for some questions. And if you've got questions, if you can place them in the chat, as I said, we'll try to get through as many things as we can. But if we can't get through them all, we'll certainly compile the questions and try to get back to others separately. So if you've got a question, please put it in the chat now. If not, I know we did have a question prior to the call, and maybe Peter, if you can get ready to answer that, we can maybe go with that one if we don't get any in the chat here right away. Okay, Peter, do you want to answer the question that we received prior?
Yeah, sure. So I'm just grabbing it here.
Yeah, no problem. And
just so I can
while you're doing that, if there are other questions, go ahead and type them in the chat.
So one of the questions we got prior to this session, I'll read it out loud. I'm particularly interested in private networks via 5G, their configurations. Can they be hosted overseas? And if a private developer can own and operate his private network while leasing a slice to the incumbent mobile operators to extend their service, what are the pros and cons of the latter? Additionally, what has been the optimized spectrum to facilitate, and has it been the norm to designate such spectrum as premium? So to summarize, questions about private networks and how they can be done. The question asked specifically about whether or not the core network could be hosted overseas, or I'm thinking what the person is asking is whether the core could be hosted in perhaps a public cloud somewhere else. So I think from a technical perspective, it certainly can. You could have your 5G core not in the country and point all of your 5G cell sites to it. I think the challenge there would be ensuring low latency and ensuring reliability. So if all of your cell sites have to traverse a lot of transport and routers and other networks to get to that cloud, then you have potential points of risk there, where if you lose any of those connections, then your network is down. And because they're not your network, you're relying on an SLA to get it back up and running again. So, if I zoom in on private networks, what I've seen in the market up to this point is private networks have been very geared towards mission critical type applications, being that, for example, you have an oil and gas company or a mining company who wants a private network to connect all of their people and all of their machinery. And they want that because they want more control. So they want to be able to build and move the network however they see fit, create network slices as they see fit, and not have to rely on transport connections, leaving their business and going elsewhere. So with regards to mission critical type private networks, having a core in a different country doesn't really work so well for them. They actually, we in our case, we've talked to them about that, and they're much more interested in having one local to them, where they know that any connection that goes down, they can send their techs and their people to fix it ASAP. With regards to spectrum, the other half of that question, we've seen a couple different ways that this has been done as well. So in various regions that we've seen private networks leverage spectrum by partnering with another operator. What I think what's nice about that option is by partnering with the operator, these enterprises, as they build private networks, they can leverage the expertise of the operator, and they can also leverage the spectrum holdings of that operator. So for the various operators around the world, most hold multiple bands of spectrum. There's and usually a way to figure out what chunks of spectrum could be reallocated to these private networks and be used without interfering with the production network. In contrast, if there's dedicated spectrum available for private networks, whether it's set aside by the regulator or through a flex use license by the regulator, I've seen this in the market as well. The challenge is it becomes very first come first serve. So if the first guy applies for that spectrum and gets it, then nobody else can really use it, because if you're within close vicinity of one another, you're going to create interference and impact both networks. The other problem with dedicating spectrum to private networks in the marketplace is if it's dedicated to private networks, then as a result, it can't be used by the public. So if you have very valuable spectrum, for example, 3500 or 2100, and you dedicate chunks of it to enterprise, then the regular customer out there on the street and going about their day-to-day lives can't use it because it's been placed in a use case that is only available to the people who work for that company. So from a regular perspective, something to consider. Certainly from an operator perspective, we would rather see the spectrum being used and available to the public, and then we can work with these large enterprise companies on how to create it, make it kind of pseudo private for their needs.
Thanks, Peter. I'm not sure if you got the chat open, but the next question is, how difficult was it to transition from a non-trusted vendor to a trusted vendor, looking at it from a financial perspective? Can you touch on that?
Yeah, it certainly was, as far as difficulty, it was quite difficult. We had, more than a decade's worth of experience with the previous vendor. So our team understood it really, really well and very deeply. So the first big hurdle was getting everybody to relearn how to install the equipment, how to run the keystrokes, configure the base stations, make it work. Another big challenge was the interoperability. So as you can imagine, if you imagine a city with a couple hundred cell towers, when you start swapping towers, you're going to create boundaries between all of these towers where the new vendor stuff and the old vendor have to work with one another, hand off customers, have equal to or better experience so that the customer doesn't notice whether they're on one network or the other. So lots to sort out there. We did a lot of that testing in the golden cluster phase. A lot of time spent on that boundary, making sure that people can move seamlessly back and forth. From a financial perspective, it was challenging in that we had a lot of network equipment that, to be honest, wasn't that old from the old vendor. So when it came to depreciation and book value, we certainly had to work with our finance teams to adjust how that was dealt with, so that we could accelerate that depreciation and get it out of our network as we put the new stuff in. So it's, to be honest, that's probably the biggest, and I see why you asked the question. The biggest hurdle in 5G is the financial puzzle piece. It's hard enough to stand up a business case for 5G because of just the cost of 5G. It's even harder when you're taking down another vendor's equipment that technically still has some life left in it.
Yeah, the other piece I would add there is, I think in the early going and in the golden cluster stage, we spent some time, I would say, I'll say this delicately, but training our vendor on how we work and how we like to work. And we had made that investment with the previous vendor. And, I think that investment and time in sort of making sure they understand your business and how you run your business and how you run your networks is very valuable. That's now why we're sort of able to get into rinse and repeat mode, where we can sort of bang these out at a relatively steady rate as they know what's expected from them within our networks. And so it's an investment of time, and that costs money, but I think it saves us money in the long run. The next question was, is Alive going to implement 5G? And, I don't think I can speak for Alive, but I do know, we've had conversations with them like every other mobile operator. I think they know they'll be moving to 5G at some point in time. The question is, when is the right point in time? And I don't think that's a one size fits all answer for every operator. I think there's a combination of, things that will happen that will help people move to 5G, be it, regulatory, compliance rules, spectrum auction, businesses forcing you, roamers forcing you, or even your vendor forcing you, or forcing your hand to move there. So it's not a cookie cutter, one size fits all answer for operators around sort of when and if you're going to implement 5G in the near term. But the reality is everyone will implement 5G over time. If you look back at the chart we had in the early going, going back 20 years, we were at 2G. That sort of a new generation of technology comes out every sort of seven-ish years. And at some point in time, you have to adopt it. The next one there was talk about the initial launch of Alive. Do you see that one, Peter? Can you speak to that one?
Yeah, a live launch. Can you talk about the initial stage remote core? Yeah, so it wasn't so much a remote core in that Alive being a greenfield network, they had an opportunity to build a highly resilient network, and they did. And kudos to them for doing it. So what they did was they built two cores, one on one island and one on another, so that they had full end-to-end resiliency in the event of failure. So in the case where where something happened to one of their cores, they could flip their whole network over to their other core. And it's a very similar architecture that a lot of folks use. Certainly that's how we have it built up in Saskatchewan here as well at SaskTel. Now, fortunate for us up here, we don't really see too many natural disasters. So our flipping back and forth between the cores is more so when we're doing upgrades and less so because of disaster recovery. But certainly, in the Caribbean and certainly in the Bahamas, through hurricane season, was it a lot of extra money? Probably, yes, building a second core, but in the end, it makes it a little bit easier to sleep at night, knowing that you can, if something were to happen to one of your cores, you had another one to flip over to. Second question from Jimmy: can you talk about 5G in an Open RAN environment today? Yeah, sure. Open RAN is really interesting. If folks are paying attention to any of the press releases, there's been quite a few operators moving towards this path already. So for the folks who aren't familiar with Open RAN, effectively what it is it's an ability to run 5G radio access network by decoupling the hardware and software and using common off-the-shelf servers as your hardware. And then to take it a step further, Open RAN also has the radio interface opened up, so you could technically use an off-the-shelf radio, separating it from the radio software. So with all that technical speak, what does that mean? It means you can, today, if you're buying from a Samsung or a Nokia or an Ericsson, their software and their hardware are coupled together. So if you're using their radio hardware, you have to use their radio software. And if you're using their radio hardware and software, then you have to use their base station. With Open RAN, it allows you to decouple that, where if you could run an HP server as your base station, you could run someone else's radio with someone else's software, someone else's radio software, as well as someone else's RAN software, and kind of go pick best of breed. And what's also really neat about it is it lets you scale up and down appropriately. So if you have a really rural site that might only need one or two radios, you could build it with Open RAN products instead of using the more expensive, oftentimes more expensive RAN vendor products. So it's a bit of a, I equate it to, if folks remember when, when personal computers first came out, and you could buy, a shell from one company, the power system supply from somebody else, the RAM from somebody else, hard drive from somebody else, put it all together and it still works as a computer. It's really what they're trying to do with Open RAN. And we're seeing it as well on the core network side with virtualization, being able to run, being able to decouple the hardware from the software and not have to run those purpose-built appliances that, might be right-sized for a Vodafone or an AT&T, but perhaps not right-sized for small companies, small operators like ourselves. So by decoupling those, it should allow us to bring the cost down and scale it down appropriately. And speaking of vendors, just to circle back to that, the moving from non-trusted vendor to trusted vendor from a financial perspective, one of the key aspects of our vendor selection process was to look at, with all the new vendors, do any of them offer any financial advantage versus the model that the current vendor was providing? So we kind of looked at, what are all the things that our current vendor charging for, what are they charging for, how much are they charging for those things, and were there ways around it in negotiating with the new vendor? So that was a big piece of the puzzle too. A number of the other vendors have, we'll call it, unique models on how they do features and licensing and hardware costs that help offset some of the costs. So being able to understand that and negotiate that as you do vendor selection is an important piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, the next question there really around the use cases, and I think the reality is there isn't a single use case that drives sort of the top service offering out of 5G, for lack of better terms. The reality is it's many use cases and many things. And what we're starting to see is a significant lift in connectivity for IoT and those types of service offerings. So smart cities and even in Saskatchewan where we are, smart agriculture, where there's more devices that need to be connected to the network, and they have different use cases. Some of them have use cases of high bandwidth video type deployments. Others have very low bandwidth requirements, but sort of high connectivity requirements. And 5G is just enabling us to be able to connect more devices to the network and provide more service offerings to more and different types of industry. One of the other areas that we see, we're not going too far into it ourselves, but 5G also puts you in a position to be able to provide sort of a fixed 5G broadband type service in a different way than you could do it over 4G technologies. Here in Saskatchewan with SaskTel, we're not really adopting that heavily because from a broadband perspective, we've got extremely deep penetration of our broadband networks, our fixed broadband networks. So we have fiber and copper and broadband services into a vast majority of the homes here in Saskatchewan. So we're not really using 5G to provide that fixed broadband service, but it is something that it can empower. And I think in some of your networks, there's probably some opportunity there to be able to use 5G to provide broadband services to people who are not served or underserved today. And the other thing that will come, and Peter alluded to this in some of the 5G deployment models, is network slicing. We see from an industry perspective, we've got a lot of oil and gas and mining here in Saskatchewan, and those industries want to have their own 5G networks that they can use above ground, below ground in the case of mines, private LTE or private 5G networks. And we see when we can kind of get all the way through the 5G evolution and have the complete standalone core. The network slicing will give us sort of a different set of business services that we can provide out, to that segment. And Peter might have a little bit to add on that point because he's been pretty intimate with some of those pieces of work we're doing.
Yeah, no, it was, the use case side has been quite interesting to watch. When 5G kind of first hit the mass market back in 2018, 2019, there was tons of proof of concepts and trials around the world and all the different ways to use 5G. And many of them were quite novel and interesting, from connected factories to connected vehicles and workers, etc. Um, what's unique about all these use cases is, for most of them, it's about enterprises trying to find ways to improve productivity and increase efficiency, and certainly for us up here, ways to improve safety and being able to find employees, reach employees when it really matters. Now, from my perspective, it's, why haven't all of these novel use cases taken off across the markets around the world? I think the enterprises, the businesses that want to leverage this technology, they see the technology work, and they're still trying to rationalize, is it worth their investment? How much money they're going to need to spend? What do they get out of it in return? And it's quite challenging for these enterprises because they're not operators, they're not ISPs, and they don't understand, to, in great detail how much this network is going to cost to build and how much is it going to cost to run and own in the long term. And I think that's where the missing link is, us operators working closer with all of these enterprise companies to give them some confidence and reassurance that the numbers that they're looking at and the use cases that they're looking at make sense for them. So here at SaskTel, we spend a lot of time with our customers having those conversations, trying to demystify some of the technology with them, but also put on a business hat and try to really operate as if we're one of their employees, and look at it as, does this use case make sense? Does the investment make sense? How does it scale? How is it supported? Really, in order to make it sustainable. It's one thing to put in cool technology and do a press release and high five, but it's another to keep it running, keep it working, build all your workflow and policies and procedures around it. And that's the transformation piece that I think all of these enterprises are looking for. They're just, generally speaking, they're struggling with it because it's new workflow, it's new process, it's new technology, changing something that they've probably been doing for decades, if not more.
Yeah, and then the last question that I see there is around using hyperscalers in the 5G core. And in SaskTel's case, we're not doing that. SaskTel operates a number of data centers, I think 8 data centers in the province, both for internal use and for client use. So we have both virtual data centers where people can have virtual servers, but also co-location data centers where customers can co-locate their equipment into our data centers. And so we have virtualized our 5G core, but within our own network environments. And in fact, that sort of core virtualization and sort of telco cloud is something we've really embraced heavily as a result of the 5G evolution that we're making, with a focus on bringing all of those vendors into one set of virtualized environments that we own and operate, versus each vendor wanting to bring their own virtualized telco cloud environment for their set of services. And that's something we've made a pretty heavy investment in as we've moved towards 5G. Peter, I'm not sure if there's anything you'd like to add in that regard.
Yeah, I think you hit the high points. Really for us, we like running things ourselves and having control over that. Ultimately, that reliability, that security of having our own telco cloud as opposed to putting it on someone else's infrastructure. As I said before, could it be done this way, where you, instead of building your own, you put it on someone else's cloud? I think so. I think what you'd have to consider as an operator is, what else, if I build a data center to run my 5G core, what else can I use that data center for? And when you look at, whether it's data storage or the IT side of your shop, who that would probably leverage it, customers who might leverage your data center, this AI boom that's happening in the market right now, which also resides in data centers. can start to stack up a lot of reasons why perhaps a data center that not only does 5G core for the network, but does other data center things across the region, across your market, your country, it starts to make a lot more sense of maybe I want this thing in my country, in my control, as opposed to offshore.
See another question there. Would we work with regulators to help define 5G environments and what they might look like? The answer to that is yes. We've done work with regulators in the past, and we in Canada with the CRTC, we operate in a very highly regulated environment. And as the operator, I think we have both good and bad views of how that impacts us at times. But the reality is we understand sort of how that regulation needs to happen, both to provide sort of some oversight and controls of how those products and services are rolling out in the market, but also we understand from the operator's perspective, the things they need that can help to incent them to move that set of products and services forward. So yes, we'd be happy to work with regulators if they want a perspective. We've got a fairly large team. Peter's closer to that team than I am, that works directly with the regulators here in Canada that we can tap into to sort of help. Just from a history perspective, one of our former presidents, when he left the company, was in Bermuda working for the regulator there. So we do have some history, not only in working with regulators, but in providing resourcing to regulators that's come out of our organization. Peter, anything you'd like to add there?
Well, I think you covered it. It's we certainly, we have a number of folks who work on this all day, every day, reading every public consultation, responding to every inquiry. It's a big task for sure to, and it's a bit challenging being a smaller player in a large market, because our voice perhaps isn't quite as loud as the others, but it doesn't stop us from submitting our opinions and our views on how various policies should be built up.
Absolutely. I don't see any other questions in the chat, but certainly if there are, I did put my contact information in the chat. If there's anybody that has a follow-up question, don't hesitate to reach out. We'll try to get back to you as quickly as we can. I mentioned before, Peter and I will be at the CANTO conference in Miami here in July. So if you're attending there, we'd really encourage you to come out and sort of seek us out. We'll have a booth there, but like I said, we'll also have a room where we'll be doing a bit of a deeper dive, a set of sessions into SaskTel's 5G experience, and we would welcome all of you to come. I'm going to hand it now over to Chriselle Martin to wrap things up. Chris, thank you for your time, and I'll hand it to you. Oh, you're on mute, dear.
Hi, you guys hearing me now?
Yes.
Okay, cool, great. Thank you so much, Scott. You took away a little bit of my job there, because I was going to say that you guys are going to be at our CANTO conference in Miami. So, but first, I'd like to thank everyone for joining our CANTO conversation. The questions were very engaging. And for me, at the telecommunications company that I worked prior, I remember talking to a colleague, and at this point, we were still on 2G, and he made the comment and said, Chriselle, next couple of years, the most important thing will be data. And he was so true. He actually saw that years in advance. So to see it now is really quite remarkable. And now there's even talk about 6G. Imagine that's where we're at, right? So thank you so much for joining. Thank you so much for being part of our CANTO conversation. We also want to tell you, please mark your calendars. We are almost 1 month away for our upcoming annual conference and trade exhibition, which is taking place between July 7th to the 10th at 2024 at the lovely JW Marriott Turnberry and Spa. It's a mouthful, yes, but it's a great place. This is our second year going to be at the Marriott Turnberry and Spa in Miami, Florida. The event promises to be a dynamic gathering of industry leaders, experts, innovators, you will also have the opportunity to see today's speakers exhibiting at the event. So for that alone, you should come out. And for anyone who is on the call and lives in Miami, we also have 1-day passes available. Yeah. At this point, I'd like to say, if you are not following us on our social media platforms, please go and do so now. We are on YouTube, we are on Instagram, we are on Facebook, very active there, and more or less everything that happens in Canto and in the ICT space, we more or less share it on our social media platforms. So be sure to follow us there. Secondly, this concludes our current season of Canto Conversations as we gear up for the upcoming conference. So stay tuned for new episodes resuming. We anticipate between October and November. And for those of you who joined late, not to worry, you can catch the replay on our Facebook page, but it will also be uploaded onto our YouTube channel as well by tomorrow. Yeah. Once again, I'd like to extend our sincere gratitude to Mr. Peter Dang for his engaging and valuable presentation, and Mr. Scott Argy for facilitating the discussions. We appreciate your time and your expertise. And again, we thank you so much for being part of Canto Conversations. We want to see you at Canto 2024. For everyone, I'm putting you guys under pressure a little bit. If you have intents of being at the conference, please hashtag I'm going to be there at Canto 2024. If you're not thinking about it, hopefully, this puts the thought in your mind to be there. Let me see some comments. I want to see some comments, even if it's from the Canto staff. I want to see that you guys will be there, right? And the next Canto conversation will be in October or early November. So at this point, I'll say have a great day, everyone. Thank you so much for being part of the Canto community, the Canto family. We enjoy every bit of it and look forward to seeing you at the conference.
Thanks, Chris.